The stay put order was front and centre yesterday, as indeed it was even on the night. As I understand it, if you had rung 999, you'd have been told to stay in your flat.
That's correct.
Your dad just grabbed you and your sister and got you out of there. I mean, that is an astonishing reflection, isn't it?
I agree. It's obviously my dad had the capacity to be able to think, you know what, fire's underneath you. Let's just get everyone out. I'd rather them be angry at me for waking them up for no reason than them being angry at me for not waking them up and putting them in a position where they could have lost their life. Now, the only reason my dad was able to do that was because it was extremely early on. It wasn't something that, it wasn't at a point where the corridors were filled with smoke. It wasn't at a point where the stairwell was filled with smoke. It was at a point where everything was still calm. Firefighters hadn't yet arrived. And
the point being, of course, that he saw from the outside on his way in what was happening, didn't register on any level the scale of what was set to unfold, but just thought better safe than sorry.
Exactly.
Everybody else on the inside would have been blissfully unaware of what was going on at that point.
Yeah.
So I mean, it doesn't sound lucky by most definitions of the word, but of course it was chance that saved your lives.
Complete chance. I think thing is, at the time there was a lot of people outside screaming at people from the green, saying for the people to come out, and there were obviously firefighters, the seniors in the firefighters didn't change the stay put policy until much later, when it was obvious from the people outside watching that something should have changed. And
this is the point, isn't it, that is the hardest really to contemplate and to process, is what was obvious, apparently obvious, was not being recognised or acted upon by the decision-making members of the FBU, of the LFB's management team.
That is correct.
So that criticism, I think, sticks.
I think it's completely accurate to say that if anyone is being criticised, it's not firefighters. It is the institutional establishment of the LFB. And to quote, to have a quote from World War I, I think lions led by donkeys is a brilliant analogy of what was going on. It was firefighters who sometimes disregarded direct orders from their commanding officer saying, I don't care what you say, I'm going to go up there. And to me, it's about juxtaposing the individual firefighter who risked his life that night with the commanding officer who was inadequately trained by the LFB. Even the commanding officers didn't necessarily follow their own policies on what to do. They weren't prepared for an evacuation of a high-rise building, and the lessons of Lakanal House, a fire in 2009, were not learned. When Sir Martin Warbick says that should have been etched into the institution of the LFB. And to me, I think it's difficult to have this conversation without making a sort of comparison to the Macpherson report, where the police were found to be institutionally racist. The LFB is being found to be institutionally in a position where they have not yet learned from Lakanal House fire. And
it's a powerful parallel, that, actually, with the Macpherson report, because a lot of police officers at the time couldn't see what was in front of them. It took an outsider to come along and explain what institutional racism was, and I saw you struggle to find the right words, because you don't want to say institutional incompetence or anything like that. It's a sort of institutional inadequacy, perhaps.
Yeah, inadequacy, I think, is actually the best word, because it's about not being able to find the right policy. It's about not being able to find the right way of dealing with something that they didn't know to happen. And one of the most famous quotes from Danny Cotton from the Inquiry is, we couldn't have prepared for Grenfell the same way we wouldn't have been able to prepare for a spaceship landing on the Shard.
Yes.
I think that goes to show the level of inadequacy from her as a leader of the LFB to say, you know what, look, I failed, I want to improve. The fact that that yesterday was focused purely around firefighters, where firefighters were coming in to defend their superior officers, when it wasn't the firefighters who were being accused of anything.
No.
It's about an institutional change that needs to happen within the London Fire Brigade, which can only happen if they accept that there were failings. The whole point of the inquiry is to find out the truth so that things can change for the better. And I don't think the London Fire Brigade has been, I don't think there's like the police or the ambulance service, it's very difficult to kind of put a blame and say, you're doing things wrong, you should potentially change it. The police and the ambulance service, as well as the NHS, come under a lot of scrutiny, whereas the LFB haven't been come under a lot of scrutiny since Lakanal House fire. And Sir Martin Warbick is trying to enhance that point, where he's saying, look, what we need to do is, you haven't learnt from Lakanal House, so maybe if I go harder, you're
Yes.
going to learn from Grenfell Tower. I think that is the point that we're trying to make, where, again, obviously, I'm not speaking for all bereaved or survivors, because obviously some bereaved families feel individual firefighters are responsible for the deaths of their own, obviously knowing that the fire was not caused by the fire brigade, but things that the individual firefighters could have done. But again, it's about a lot of those people ran into a building that a lot of others were running away from.
Yes.
Whereas commanding officers, I'm not sure they would have done the same.
And of course, I mean, in their defence, I suppose, for want of a better word, we will never know. We're coming to the end of our time together. You're always welcome here if you
Thanks,
need a
James.
platform, or if you need to amplify anything. But at risk of embarrassing you now, you're a very good man, Tiago, because the first thing you wanted to talk about this morning was the suffering of Bahelu Kabedi, the man in whose flat that the fire began, and people may have forgotten or may not have been aware of the toxicity of the abuse that he was subjected to. People suggesting he was some sort of terrorist, arsonist, that he'd done it deliberately, that he saved his own skin and left others to die, all roundly and completely demolished in the first phase of this report. Do you know how he's getting on?
Not well. And I think, obviously, quite at the beginning, there was a lot of talk about how he reacted in regards to the fire, and let's just say some of the media weren't necessarily quite amicable to the fact that it wasn't his fault. He was suffering just like all of us, except for us, we had an opportunity to actually put our lives into perspective, whereas for him, he's had to be removed from the community because of fear that someone will do something to him. There are still a lot of people on Twitter who probably don't have anything else to do other than still say that Mr. Kabedi is actually responsible for the fire, when it's quite obviously not true.
And you speak of a section of society that perhaps are not that interested in facts, but you mentioned it, so I'll ask you this in conclusion. How do you retain your faith in human nature? I mean, my connection with this tragedy is tangential. It's professional. I reported on it. I felt my heart break, but that's from the outside looking in, and the aftermath, to see what other British people could do and say about their compatriots and their neighbours. It shook something deep inside me, and I'm inspired to see people like you refusing to be bowed or broken by it.
I think we're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
When I agree with what you're saying, but there's one thing that brought my spirits up. The amount of money raised for the families after the fire, I think, goes to show that the people on Twitter, they're speaking with their keyboards, whereas people out there spoke with their wallets, spoke with their mind, and were there to help. And to me, the humanity is about looking at your friends and neighbours and being able to do something about it. I've not lost faith in humanity, and that's why I continue to fight for it. There are people, reporters like you, like many others on LBC, who have been an extremely supportive force, where they've come here and said, look, we need to report on something and we need to make sure that it's done properly. And you've always given me a platform to come here and speak about it. And I think, to me, it's given me this position where other like-minded people can think and say, you know what, I do actually want to get something done, to change something for the better. And I hope that I can continue to do that, hopefully as time progresses and we can actually get some change in legislation, change in whatever needs to be changed, to make sure that other people do not experience what we did.
This is going to define your entire life, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Well, rest assured, Tiago Alves, of our continuing gratitude and support. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks.